If I could please get Aaron Ginn, sorry. Aaron is the head of growth at Everlane. So Aaron, could you please come on up? He does exist. Aaron? Can I please have Lloyd? Lloyd Lobo. There we go. Second round of applause. He doesn't come up for the first one. Okay. Can I please get Dave Zorab, the growth and venture hacker here at Angellist? There we go. That was much quicker. Perfect. We can give him a better round of applause than that, can't we? And then finally, Viraj Modi, engineering manager of growth at Dropbox. Great. So to start off here, why don't we just start with what is a growth hacker exactly, and what does that mean to you guys in your companies respectively?
That's a loaded question.
I think growth hacking is nerds doing marketing. Nerds don't want to admit that they're just marketers because they think programming is cooler, or smarter, or something. But that's what I call it when, for example, my wife asks what it is.
I think from Dropbox's perspective, something like growth hacking really is engineering a product to be what users want it to be, and like using that to grow the product. We don't have any growth hackers per se, but we have a lot of engineers and like product managers working to build foundational, like, we're also at a scale where we can afford to do this. Before Dropbox, I was at a 3-person startup called Audio Galaxy, and like everybody's title was growth hacker because it's basically survival. But it got acquired by Dropbox, and then when you're at that scale, the definition of what you do to grow changes, and that's where a lot of foundational engineering comes into play.
So what would you say in Dropbox? It's a different scenario here, but in terms of growth hacking or growing your team and the Cavalry behind you, what have you guys found to be some successful methods as you move from a 3-person shop to Dropbox, which is what I hope everyone here is trying to do with their companies?
I think the most important thing that I look for when I add someone to my team is being a generalist. Right now I'm adding another designer to my team, and at Everlane we actually run all of product, so it's sort of very similar to like Wealthfront in the sense of Wealthfront, the product team is like the growth team, it's like the same thing. And the one thing I look for in a designer is like, are they comfortable working on the boring email or the like really awesome new feature? And being able to have that flexibility to go where the company needs them to go, I think is really, really critical. The second is a over dependency on metrics and analysis and experimentation, less emphasis on your own ego to propagate your own opinion about what the next feature set should be. And I think one of the limitations of a lot of really good product managers and a lot of really good designers is that they're very opinionated about lots of things that they probably shouldn't necessarily have an opinion on, but they necessarily, they sort of push forward a view about what the world should be. And on my team, there's a very heavily emphasis on that what we do is what's best for the company, what we think is going to move metrics more, and also what's like really good for users. There isn't an I or me in any of that scenario.
I totally agree that lack of ego is super important, right? The data can prove you wrong all the time. But coupled with that, I would look for curiosity, right? Like basically when I think of like running a test or running the experiment, like it comes down to the psychology of your users. Like you have this like amazing platform like Everlane or Dropbox or Angellist where you get to like see what people actually want, right? and every time you can learn something. So curiosity and lack of ego are important. I also think it's important to look for people in the right places. For example, Angellist. Thank you.
I think what makes a good growth hacker is someone who can have several hypotheses, can come up with a really good way to estimate the opportunity for each of those, and then run quick experiments to validate or invalidate that theory. I think we keep saying fail fast, but even at like Dropbox scale, fail fast is important because you could waste a lot of time and energy, chasing not like ego, but like things that you had intuition about that was incorrect. Someone who can like quickly do the math and say, okay, here's what success would look like, here's what failure would look like, let's go measure, and then like make a decision.
Great. So that sounds like a lot of things you're looking for in the growth hacker, but how do you guys actually identify these individuals, and how do you evaluate them as well, and then how would you onboard them in terms of getting them into your companies?
So the primary way I actually hire, so whenever I think of the term growth hacker, I actually think of the term PM, because in a team, the PM actually owns the direction of the team, right? So generally speaking, the growth hacker usually is the product owner in that sense. So the way I find people is actually through my network. I generally actually don't trust anybody from the product perspective if they haven't been filtered somewhere in my network. What? PM search, yeah. So that's actually my primary method. So if a lot of the speakers here I know, if they sent me somebody like, hey, this guy or girl is really good at growth, and they just, their team had layoffs or whatever, that would actually be a big open door in my book. The other one would be working on a growth team that's led by someone that I really respect, like the folks at Uber or like Wealthfront or LinkedIn, like people who have like a really solid track record of working on growth. And so it is one of my strategies that I steal associate PMs from those organizations, because they generally have all of like the, they have the foundation, but they're not necessarily, they don't think that they can go lead a team yet. So then, they come work at a more interesting place like Everlane.
So Angellist is a pretty strange company in the way we run. We're about 30 people. Basically, nobody has a title. We're all kind of responsible for all kinds of shit that you wouldn't have to do at a different company. So when we hire someone, we've never hired someone specifically for growth. We generally hire, engineers or designers like myself who want to also build stuff that grows. I've never had that great opportunity to poach someone just for a growth team. But when we're evaluating people, we just basically give them an incredible amount of freedom. You give somebody a lot of rope, and then hopefully they don't hang themselves. Hopefully they do something awesome. And if they do something awesome, you keep them. That's pretty much it. It's like the most decentralized, least managed company I've ever worked at. I like to say that we have just slightly less management than we need, and that's served us well. So if somebody can survive in that kind of chaos, we're hiring. So
I think entrepreneurs who've built their own companies and failed or succeeded, I don't think that metrically matters. But if you've like built something and tried to grow it, and whatever the outcome, if you really tried, you have pretty good intuition about things you did wrong, things you learned. And I think at Dropbox we have a lot of I had my own company before I came to Dropbox. We have a lot of founders of companies who tend to have really good product intuitions, sort of things that it's like, oh man, I had done this, it failed so miserably, but I know what I did wrong, and so I'm going to fix it this time. And your second question was, how do you onboard them to an organization like that? What we try to do is we just give them a lot of breathing room when they first start, almost like, hey, just imagine you run this team. What it does is it prevents them from inheriting a lot of the biases or the blind spots that your team already has. And they'll make mistakes, but that's okay. They'll also often enough come up with enough sort of good stuff that you should incorporate into your own processes that they'll be worth it.
So for individuals here who are interested in actually getting into their growth hacking space or seeing as something they're interested in, how does someone learn to become a growth hacker? So if you're not fortunate enough to work at Angellist or Everlane or Dropbox to start, where do you get this experience first where you can then take that into other startups or into your organizations themselves?
So if you don't have an opportunity to actually learn from someone who's done it before, I would say probably the people who've been writing about the, I guess I'll just use my own example. So the way I learned all of this stuff is that basically my startup was in the process of dying. And a lot of times you need to actually go through that same sense of urgency that the money's going to run out in 3 months. And you have to like push the numbers really, really hard, very, very quickly, and to get sort of either a bridge or something to that effect. And that pain is actually really beneficial and teaches you a lot of skills about how to determine, which test to pick, how to determine, what's a priority inside of the organization. Like it teaches you a lot of the fundamentals. I don't want any company in this room obviously to go through that pain, but that's the way at least I learned. And I think everyone who's probably, I would consider an expert on growth, has actually done that same process. They've struggled, and they've then figured it out, like the mechanisms that go into building a scalable growth channel.
Yeah, so my story is the same too. I had a company that was totally failing, and you just have to try to fucking make it work, right? Which is, and I think being a founder is probably not the only way to be like a super awesome growth dude. Not that I am one, but there's something about that experience of just having everything on the line. The alternative, of course, is to read all the wonderful material that exists on the web about growth hacking. You can learn all the basics, but it's like riding a bike, right? You can read a lot of blog posts about riding a bike, but until you actually hop on one, you're not really a bike rider, right? Terrible metaphor, but I think it gets the point across.
So Aaron's written like 80% of the material on the web on growth hacking.
Read Aaron's blog. Done.
Yeah, I want to plus one that, but I'll give you one different answer. When you use products you like, or like if you see some app and you're like, oh, I'm going to sign up for this, like pause for a second and think, hey, why am I signing up for this? How did they pitch me? Did they get me, to use Facebook ads, or like, did they not use that? Try to sort of analyze your own behavior, and that's a good way to, exercise some of those muscles that you really have to use to kickstart growth at any sort of company.
So moving it back from growth, because I know there's a lot of early stage company and entrepreneurs here, what are some of the mistakes you see from growth hackers or from entrepreneurs who are making those first hires? You mentioned you were with 3 employees, now you're at Dropbox, you had a couple of startups which almost died, and you've sworn enough times to tell us how things have gone wrong here. Swearing, I think, is completely allowed, right? Lloyd, swearing's allowed? Okay, swear as much as you like. So what would you guys say for that? What are the lessons you guys have learned, or some of the mistakes and pitfalls that some of the entrepreneurs here now in the audience can avoid?
So if you are a person who wants to advertise themselves as a growth hacker, individual, whatever you want to call it, my biggest criticism is speaking of writing, I wrote a blog post about how growth people can sometimes be seen as like a magician, like as in, I show up and I rub magic dust on the product and then automatically it grows, right? That's actually not how it happens. Any time that I've actually found a scalable channel that was growing by itself through organic means, it was through the course of 3 to 4 months of experimentation and lots of failures over and over and over again. But my intuition saw that there's something going on in user behavior that shows that there is an opportunity here. So when you're working on growth as like an individual in a corporation, it's really important to lay the foundation expectations of actually what you're going to do. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to fail 95% of the time, and then 5% you're going to find something, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, where the hell was that?" Right? Like it like explodes, and everyone's really happy. But you have to basically lay that foundation of like I'm going to fail a lot and often. And a lot of times when you join a company, they think that, oh, we're going to have this growth person that's going to be magic instantly. And it doesn't ever turn out that way. Unless you're just like, extremely fortunate and you found some magic product market fit like Uber or something like that. But if you're like a founder or of an early stage company, my recommendation is not very sexy, but it's more or less if you are an early stage company, you actually don't have product market fit, you actually don't have a stable customer base, and you don't actually have a very good distribution channel yet. And all those are related to the fact of, are you actually making something people want? Like as a growth person who works on growth, I cannot help you if no one wants your thing, right? The only time I can help you is someone wants your thing and I can tell a million people about it, right? Like that's something I can do. And I think a lot of people put the cart before the horse, not realizing that the core institution of growth is built upon a well understood product market fit.
Yeah, I think that's totally it. I feel like there's the one sin which we've all been told 1,000 times. The woman from Mixed Panel also told us again. Like you need to instrument everything, right? Like you absolutely must test. So if you're not testing, you've already basically screwed up, right? But there's the flip side of that is like, okay, you could have like the best instrumented funnel and you're using all the best practices and your onboarding is like super sick and has an amazing conversion and nobody cares at all about what you're building, right? I've built and launched so many things over my life and most of the time nobody gives a shit, right? Because there's so many products in the world. What makes your thing special? And if there's not special, then it doesn't matter how well you've tweaked all your metrics. No growth hacker is going to change that.
Yeah, I think Alisa's presentation was pretty amazing. For most early stage startups, in addition to what they said, the hardest thing to do is divorce yourself from the emotion of what you're building. When I was at Audio Galaxy, we actually had like pretty good product market fit, but like we always had these weird ideas of what our users were, and the hardest thing to do was to step back and let user actions sort of validate or invalidate those really quickly, and then if something you intuitively thought was correct isn't correct, like fuck it, move on. Like there's 100 things you need to do, and like regretting something that you wanted to build and that it failed is not one of them.
All right, so we're hearing about all the negatives with growth hacking, what you can't do. So if your product's shit, figure that out quickly and move on, is what I got from there. But why don't we hear some good stories from you guys? So could you guys give us an example of a growth hack or product or something you've actually pushed through that you're proud of, just to give these guys some inspiration after you've torn them down?
That wasn't the goal. It's just a little bit of a reality check. I'll mention two things. The first thing we're working on right now at Everlane is we're understanding how men and women shop very differently. For example, men, when they buy something, the probability of them returning it is almost nearly zero. But women, they love to return stuff. It's like exciting. Like they're like, oh my gosh, I get to return this thing. Great, right? And so we're basically experimenting with this idea about encouraging returns for women and basically forcing men to not return anything. So I'll let you know if that actually works out. But that's what's been very interesting working at Everlane is you get to understand how people make decisions at sort of a core point of buying and purchase. Another really interesting thing that women do is they actually multi-tab shop. So if you have like one item, let's say that you're buying a sweater from Everlane, they'll actually have like 10 tabs open regarding the sweater. It'll be like the sweater from Google Images, it'll be like the sweater from Instagram, it'll be like the sweater from Pinterest, and they'll be looking at images. Versus like the guy does is like open one tab and looks at the product page and just stays there and just stares at the product page. Doesn't go anywhere else. Doesn't even imagine the fact of like, oh, I could actually Google search for a review of this. No, they just like look at the page, right? And then they make a decision whether or not they want to buy it or not. So those really interesting quirks about how people think is actually one reason why, if you look at Amazon, their product page is basically an explosion of information. Is because they're trying to solve like 1,000 different problems at once. What we're doing at Everlane is we're actually trying to adopt a lot of the principles that like companies like Angellist and Dropbox have, and applying that to e-commerce, basically bringing in this social, almost like onboarding controlled view of e-commerce. The other one was I found a loop regarding links that were being shared externally, and it doubled MAU in the course of a month. and then increase DAO over the course of 3 months. It basically layered an additional about 10 to 15% growth week over week for the course of 3 or 4 months. And basically that was just like a reshare loop that we pushed, like we basically tested for 3 or 4 months, and then finally something just worked. And then all of a sudden, like all the numbers started moving up to the right, and this happened.
One of the many moons ago, I built a Twitter quiz website, which like totally took over Twitter for like one hot summer in 2009. But just like most of the stuff that I've built, and I don't know about you guys, but most of the stuff I've built isn't still around. The thing that is still around is the stuff I've been working on at Angellist, which is our recruiting product. I started as a side project back in 2011. And it's really about product market fit. You just build something that people actually want. It's been a one-person product for most of its life, and we're now kind of applying basic growth and retention kind of properties to it. And it's like adding fuel to a fire, which is awesome. But it really does go back to like having that one core thing that people love, and people love the way that we set them up with jobs, which is pretty cool. It was cool to make trending topics on Twitter, 7 years ago or whatever it is, but nobody really cares about that now, and I didn't really care about it then. I do care about what I'm doing now, and so maybe that's what matters.
I'll talk about a story from Audio Galaxy. This was 2010. We had in-app payments were like the new thing. We had this app that would stream music from your home computer to your phone, wherever you were, like gigabytes or terabytes or whatever. And it was all peer-to-peer, and it was really cool. We had a bunch of users using it. We're like, let's just like try to charge them money for something. So we ran a quick A/B test, and this was back when like we got in trouble with Apple eventually because they figured out what we were doing, but like we actually did this for months before they figured it out. What we started doing was we started tracking how often users were using Audio Galaxy, and for the most prolific users, we started peddling them like in-app purchases for stuff that was basically free. So like on Android apps, we had this feature that, hey, pin this song for offline playback. On Android, you can stick a USB cord and just copy shit over. Like and we charged them $9.99 for that, not even like $1.99. And it was insane because we like just presented this option to users who were really using the app all the time, and they're like, yeah, shit, hell yeah, I'm gonna buy this. And then we're like, okay, you know what? We're making a bunch of money there. How about like we actually charge lesser to people who don't use the app as much? And so we added another in-app purchase for like $1.99 for people who are occasional users, and like, hey, you want this feature? They're like, yeah. And then we said, okay, well, these two worked. How about we add an option to make a ringtone, which is natively available in Android? We're like, yeah, you can make a ringtone from within our app. Just, pay us $1.99 per ringtone. And they're like, yeah, sure. And then we did the same thing on iOS, and Apple caught on to us in a little bit, but we made a bunch of money. Yeah, but that was I don't even remember the story about how, like, I'm pretty sure there was some sort of bar involved in like the creation of this idea. An example of a different scale at Dropbox, unlike something like Spotify or any mobile app you can think of. Spotify, you download the app, you enter an artist, you hit play. It's easy. With Dropbox, you download Dropbox on your cell phone, you sign up. You can like upload your camera roll, maybe share them. But like the real power of Dropbox comes from sync, right? You have to have another device. How the hell do you take this user from a cell phone to their desktop? Their head's gonna explode if you tell them, go install this thing, they'll download it, they'll like create a new account there, and now they have 2 different accounts on 2 different devices. Of course they don't sync. Or like they'll forget their password, and all sorts of like users do a bunch of stupid shit. So like we spent months of engineering time making this absolutely seamless, where now you can go from signing up on your mobile device to logging into the Dropbox website, downloading the app, installing the app, everything without a username or a password, fully secure. Because security is a big deal. Like you have like precious content in there, but how do you make that work? And this isn't a problem that I would advise any sort of normal, like any startup to do, because it takes massive amount of engineering, but at our scale, it yielded massive returns. So those are my two stories.
Sorry, I was just tweeting that if you make up shit to buy really expensively, people will pay for it. So that works out perfectly. So before we wrap up, is there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask any of our three panelists?
Hi. So it sounds like a lot of your growth hacking is also product design. Do you guys use any user personas when you're considering? Sorry. Yeah, do you guys...
So just really quickly, guys, if we just get your attention for a couple more minutes, I think this is a really good question that a lot of people are going to want to hear. So just 2 minutes more of your time would be great, and if you could speak up, that would be awesome.
Okay. That's okay. I was just saying that our growth hackers up here sound like product designers. And I was wondering if they use personas for designing when they're considering players, like when you're talking about male versus female shoppers. Do you use that when you're designing?
Are you using personas when you're actually doing your growth hacking?
Yes, we do, because of the methodology we do to I don't know if other teams do this, but like the way that we develop ideas is often through user interviews and watching people use our stuff. And whenever we do user interviews, we basically categorize people according to age, their ethnicity, how much money they make, whether or not they're familiar with technology. We basically develop this whole demographic profile. Because there's actually lots of research to show that according to different marks in people's lives, they actually change drastically their user behavior. For example, men below the age of 30 shop very similar to women, except after men get married at the age of 30, they actually switch and go to the previous example I said before, where they actually don't shop for anything. Yeah, maybe it's that, yeah. And so it's really important to understand, like, the season that your user's in and the expectation of like what their future life is going to be, because when you're designing a growth feature, it basically has to feel so part of the experience and so like native to it, otherwise people won't use it because they'll be like, why are you asking me to invite everybody, like this doesn't make any sense. So it has to be a very like organic part of where the user's at.
That's way more advanced than what we do. We just try to think about what people would want and try to build it. But I'm not a designer. I'm just a programmer. So I could learn something from Aaron's blog.
I think I'd say at Dropbox we have more product engineers that complement designers. But we heavily leverage a user insights team. Like we just built that out about a year or so ago. It's one of the best investments we've made. They help validate a lot of ideas before we build them. They do a lot of the persona stuff, but in a much more scientific way that like I couldn't do.
Awesome, guys. So I think that wraps it up. Can we get a big round of applause for our three panelists?